The year is 1368, and the League of the Storm Cross is gathering its strength and administering its recent conquest. Across Europe, the kingdoms of Christendom are rebuilding the damage they've suffered, and, using the deep economic and political connections they formed with each other during the Fourth Crusade, in order to repair general damages and rebuild the border defenses. However, as these processes unfold behind the scenes, the most serene kingdom of Pierio-Halesia is the talk of the day. Indeed, the entire known world looks on in fascination and anticipation for what that place could become. With a puppet king on the throne with little agency of his own, the Rhodian Inquisition, under the auspices of the Supreme Inquisitor Militant and the Bishop of Rhodes, are collaborating to draft and implement policy on a national scale. First among these laws are the religious laws, with death for Satanists and explicit penalties for those with proven connections to them. Still, the people were still reticent to give up their religion and way of life. Many Pierians went to the gallows and the stake believing that an afterlife of infernal glory awaited them, threatening to possess the innocent upon their demonic rebirth. There were many ostensibly normal Pierians as well, who loved the faith of their youth which had guided their folk for 300 years. They loved the hymns sung in their infernal temples, they loved the holidays and camaraderie, and they loved the moral codes that informed their lives from cradle to grave, for no other reason than it was what they were brought up with. So long as these people made up the bulk of Pierians, even if they were broken by the Inquisition, in order to build a functional society you needed a majority that were willing to dispossess them. In practice, it seemed that about a quarter of all Pierians weren't willing to fully convert, or at the very least submit, to the authority of the Church. As such, the Church of Rhodes sought to introduce new players into their society. This is a large part of why they brought persecuted Hellas into government in the first place. Even with the enthusiastic converts from Hellas, loyal and grateful to the cause of Christ which had saved them, body and soul, from Pierian tyranny, there still weren't enough people in the mix to outnumber those Pierians who remained obstinate. As such, in 1369, King Olinthes of Pierio-Halesia proclaimed the emancipation of the serfs across the land. Indeed, he had received word from his masters, and even supplied with moral justification, this being that the oppression of those who professed the truth of Christ was repugnant in every way, with Nicetas I, Bishop of Rhodes, officially dogmatizing that concept across Christendom. The slaves had already been freed, but for these millions of people who were essentially slaves in all but title, not only did they convert to Christianity in exchange for their freedom, but, now on equal footing with their former masters, they represented enough of a population bloc to disenfranchise that segment of Pierians who were unwilling to shed their former identity and way of life. Indeed, the emancipation of the serfs resulted in a mass impoverishment of Pierian landholders, who held the majority of these laborers as property that got traded from hand to hand along with their land. Plots of land had a certain number of souls, these being serfs, that were tied to them from cradle to grave. This was no longer the case, and though many of these serfs were now poor men, they were nonetheless free men, and were able to sell their labor to landholders in a more traditional land tenant or market context. With enough people now aligned with the church and against the land's former masters, the rest of the formal laws and diktats would be more effective and widespread, including currency standardization, tax collection, and moral codes pertaining to things like adultery, theft, and murder, bringing Pierio-Halesia into line with the rest of Europe rather quickly, driving whatever dissenters still insisted on being difficult, either underground or otherwise, into the hands of the Inquisition, which is to say, into the embrace of the grave. The rest of Europe, meanwhile, also saw various reforms applied to its military, social, and governance structure. In no particular order, these will be discussed as follows. The rising tide of wealth across the board had allowed for increased labor division, with many specialists and professionals like artisan craftsmen, lawyers, town bureaucrats, and business owners made up a sizable and prominent middle class for the first time. While many of these men lived in the cities, The peasantry lived relatively pleasant lives as tenant farmers and laborers, renting properties in the land of country nobles for whom they tended the land and produced food for them in the form of taxes, and for the realm at large in the form of taking their goods to market. These tenant farmers were blessed with protections against eviction and also the right to leave should they wish, taking their family and their skills to another lord who could better care for their tenants, though many peasants felt genuine loyalty to their local lords enough to endure some hardships on their behalf. The peasants of Christendom were the happiest in the known world. Indeed, tenant farmers of a certain level of success were able to make a fair profit, some of them even pivoting into professional status. One mechanism by which the economies of Christendom operated was through the company, a body which had replaced the guild and specialized in some good or specialist activity, like construction, law, or long-distance delivery, allowing the economy to grow ever more specialized and more complex. With the League of the Storm Cross fostering such close cooperation between countries, such interconnectedness allowed for more growth and more competition, driving innovation across the board. The most unified aspect was in education, where those with the ability to afford it could attend universities across the continent, which were owned and operated by the church. For the sons of successful tenant farmers, this meant upward mobility of a sort rarely seen in history. Polite society was born in this age, with the newly swelled ranks of the middle class now making up between 10 and 20% of any given kingdom in the League of the Storm Cross. These people set culture that emulated the finery of nobility in a way which was more accessible, and that portions of the laboring classes could aspire to and even emulate. Common table manners, refined and varied conversational language, titles of deference and respect like sir and ma'am, higher standards of cleanliness, conspicuous consumption of luxury goods like instruments and jewelry, a unified lingual orthography that determined standard spellings of common words, and the introduction of social events like balls that enabled the middle class to become ever more intertwined. A private sort of event that was absent of the noise and chaos of public festivals that allowed romance to blossom and business deals to be struck. Militarily, things saw a big change as well. During the Fourth Crusade, the national armies of the constituent nations, complete with their aristocratic generals and appointed commanders, were directly administered by the Supreme Inquisitor Militant. This made for chains of command which were choked up with inefficiency, with orders getting gummed up for weeks or even lost in the system. New reforms were necessary which streamlined the chain of command, and also no longer deprived these nations of their primary armies and means of defense. Now, each nation had a percentage manpower obligation to contribute to the League of the Storm Cross, which would remain under the direct command of the Supreme Inquisitor Militant, without the deep involvement of national governments. This was handled by way of military orders being set up in each country, for which a certain number of men would sign up for and ship out wherever they were needed as part of the League's manpower obligation. Now, instead of waiting for orders from kings, the Supreme Inquisitor Militant and his Lethalators were able to directly relay commands to each military order directly, whose obligation it was as an independent body to execute those commands accurately and in whatever way would be most directly effective. Each nation had a different number of military orders, but the percentage manpower obligation was the same for each of them, adding up together to a force of about 700,000 men, with potential increases to about 1 million men in times of severe crisis. The promotion structure was also merit-based, with men of particular skill with minds for strategy given commanding ranks, though generalship was often reserved for those bred from birth for the role, an aristocratic office for noble sons sent to military colleges. Each of the established military orders under this system were unique and had their own specialties, their own techniques, and their own identities within the military command structure of the League of the Storm Cross. In any case, there was no question from any among their rank that, though they wore the uniforms of their military order, they all flew the flag of the Stormy Cross, and shed their blood in the service of one god, who shed his blood first for mankind.